How They Croaked by Georgia Bragg. Pocahontas. Pocahontas was a Native American princess. She was the daughter of Chief Powhatan. Today, princess can mean spoiled brat, and even though she was a real deal, the name Pocahontas actually means spoiled child in her language. So maybe things haven't changed all that much. But for sure, her life wasn't anything like what we've seen in the movies showing Pocahontas and John Smith, the English settler, as being practically engaged. Pocahontas was only 11 years old when she met Smith, and he left the New World 2 years later. No one likes mentioning what really happened to Pocahontas. It went like this. She was used, duped, captured, taken to England, and exhibited as living, breathing proof that savages could be civilized. Except Pocahontas wasn't living and breathing for long. Her early life was idyllic. She skipped here and there around her lush digs with her ponds, woods, and maize on the cob in what was eventually known as the state of Virginia. Things were perfect until a bunch of Englishmen, including Smith, came ashore in 1607 with plans to civilize the natives and seize everything in sight. Chief Powhatan fought the settlers and took their guns. He was on the brink of beating John Smith's brains out when, according to Smith, Pocahontas threw herself over Smith and saved his life. The chief allowed Smith to live after he promised the chief that no more settlers would be coming, which we know was a lie because John Smith turned out to be the first of a gazillion John Smiths eventually to live in Virginia. Pocahontas was delighted the killing had stopped. The young peacemaker made sure the Englishmen ate and smiled. But then more settlers arrived, and Smith left the colony without even a thank you. So she stopped helping the settlers. And without Pocahontas, there was no peace. You guessed it, fighting ensued. Naturally, the settlers wanted their guns back, so they kidnapped Pocahontas and held her for ransom. She was 17 years old. But Chief Powhatan didn't trade arms for hostages. So instead, the settlers took her to another colony 50 miles away to be civilized. They taught her English and told her about important things like Christmas and guilt. She was trapped. You can bet they never taught her how to say, "I want to go home now." They baptized her, renamed her Lady Rebecca, and married her off to John Rolfe, the luckiest guy in Virginia. Rolfe got Pocahontas' land. Land came with the package when an Indian princess got married, even a kidnapped one, and he planted tobacco all over it. They had a son named Thomas. Pocahontas couldn't escape. She was scared to death, completely made over from a deerskin-clad outdoorsy girl into a corset and bonnet-wearing indoor lady. Rolfe liked what he saw and decided to take Pocahontas and son to England on a promo tour so he could get more money for the colony and for his tobacco farm. One look at London and Pocahontas knew why the English were moving to Virginia. London was crowded, filthy, stinky eyesore. Human and animal waste were everywhere. The River Thames was full of garbage. The English bathed only once a year at that time, unlike the Indians who got wet every day. Sooty smoke from coal fires hovered in a yellow, murky cloud above the city. The cloud blocked the sunlight. It was so, uncivilized. Pocahontas was paraded around London and became a celebrity. She met King James I and raised funds for the Virginia colony that had kidnapped her. Everybody was happy except Pocahontas. She began to cough from the filthy air, and at the time, London was a giant petri dish of germs. Without immunities to these foreign germs, she was like a sheep to the slaughter. Pocahontas left London for a cleaner location in the English countryside, but she was still having trouble breathing. No one knew exactly what she was suffering from, but she was in decline. After waiting months for good sailing weather, Rolfe couldn't wait to get back to his tobacco farm. It didn't matter that Pocahontas was barely breathing. She was loaded aboard his ship along with their 2-year-old son, who was also ill. But they didn't get far. The cold sea air turned the tide for Pocahontas. She probably turned blue. The ship docked at the town of Gravesend, and Pocahontas went ashore to get medical attention. However, there is no record that a doctor even helped her. No surprise, given that the doctor-patient ratio at the time was like 1 doc to every 8,000 people. The next thing everybody knew, Pocahontas was dead. She died on March 21st, 1617, in Gravesend. She died of either tuberculosis or pneumonia. She was only 21 years old. So much for being a celebrity. News of her death wasn't even printed in the newspaper. Pocahontas' corpse was loaded into a coffin that day and taken down the block to St. George's Church. She was buried in a vault without any markings or headstone. Many years later, the church burned down. The only thing that survived the fire was the church's register of burials with Pocahontas' name in it. Instead of taking 2-year-old Thomas back to Virginia with him, Rolfe left him to be nursed back to health and raised by his brother, Henry. Rolfe had what he wanted, land and the money to keep farming tobacco. Father and son never saw each other again. Pocahontas believed in diplomacy. She did everything possible to foster peace between her people and the settlers, but her life was cut short by the manipulation of others. The deception and the filth did her in. So much for civilization. Pocahontas' son recovered, grew up, moved to Virginia, and got married and had a daughter. By the time Thomas got to Virginia, his dad was dead. Today, there are 3 million descendants of Pocahontas in England, the United States, and all over the world.